Nothing will teach you how much of a control freak you are until you go into a practice where you are expected to let go and you don't. So this is a story about how I experienced becoming an Akashic channeler from just being a curious observer at the beginning to eventually being more intrigued and practicing this for other people. And I learned a lot about my control issues. I learned a lot about how important it is to be creative rather than forceful around intuition. So this is my experience. What if I told you nothing is ever truly lost? Memories, experiences, and lives. A place where all knowledge in existence is kept. The Akashic Records. A library of light. If you want to find out what secrets it holds, come with me to remember what was lost. Welcome to the Open Record. When I first started, I was in a course that lasted for a month long with other students, and we were all new. We had to practice on each other. So everybody was very much unaware of what we were doing and how we were going to do it. And our teacher guided us through a meditation of opening the Akashic Garden. And it was basically just going into your own personal Akashic Garden. And immediately I started noticing how I was controlling everything around me. I was like, this is going to have a waterfall and this is going to have clouds over here and I'm going to move this and at the center I'm going to have and I started moving everything around until I started realizing this was about curiosity, coming with almost this openness to see or receive whatever was going to be there, not about controlling it. So my control issues appeared very early on in that course, and I started realizing how much of the input that I was receiving all of the time I wanted to sort of control constantly. So after a while, I started seeing okay, what am I perceiving? And it was just a bunch of clouds. And I was almost thinking to myself, well, that's boring. I wanted more. Until I started to understand that this place wasn't supposed to be anything. It was supposed to be the very raw part of potential, of a place where anything can become. It's almost the feeling that I got from it was there was fertile soil, anything you wanted to grow, you could grow there and you could plant in it and you could imagine in it and you could almost create your reality in this place. It just felt like a place of potential. And I started to understand how crazy that was, that it was less about coming into explore this pre-created world, but rather playing around with whatever it was that you felt you could create or the potential to create. So this started to become so clear at the beginning. Creativity and imagination played a huge part in this. And not only because this is a practice that is all happening in your perceptive non-physical skills, but I would almost say all of the skills that you would have thought would be relevant for this, clairvoyancy and being super sensitive and etheric and all of these things, were nothing compared to creativity, to what it would do to open your mind to whatever it was that you were perceiving in your mind's eye, to what it would be like if you weren't controlling your experience, but rather just openly receiving you're an antenna, And it started to be more clear to me how it was about receiving rather than calculating and creating and almost managing my experience as an antenna, but rather accepting that. And the more creative and the more imagination that you had around your antenna, the more you could play around with it because you wouldn't limit it. So you wouldn't be oh, I can't possibly be looking at this? So in my first meditation, I started to see like this sliding water dragon, almost like coming up to me. And then as I started seeing it, I flowed and I grabbed onto it. And that is what later took me to like the entrance of this Akashic Garden. But the more creativity that you have and the more flexibility that you have to be open to that imagination, the more you receive. And that to me, I think was one of the most important and relevant pieces of data that I received from that experience that I started to understand and grow with. I was like, there's something more here. This isn't about like creating things, like almost like believing there's something that isn't there and then making it real. It was about perceptive skills. It was about perception. What are you seeing? And then just opening that question and letting whatever information was pour into you. So very early on, I think I started to understand that there was little that I could say was off the table. It was almost like curiosity means being open to whatever you receive. Nothing can be wrong about what you perceive, even about other people when you're reading their Akashic records. And it started to teach me that very early on. And this was actually proven true because my first time being read my own Akashic records, we weren't really taught what to expect. But the girl that was reading my Akashic records, also learning, also practicing, was like, I don't know what I'm seeing, but I'm not receiving any information. I'm just getting this image and I'm seeing a UFO. I'm literally just seeing like this silver disc flying. And it seems like they just want to let you know they're here. She didn't know this, but I've previously said to myself, like, I feel like I'm so not from Earth. And that little confirmation for me to receive was due to the fact that she allowed herself to receive whatever message may have been there, to be perceived. And I think that was not just a good way to feel validated with that intuition that I had, but she would have had no idea that was so relevant and important to me in that moment of my life, to just feel a little confirmation from my star family. So when she said that, I started crying and I bawled my eyes out in silence, of course, because she was still talking and she was telling me everything that she was feeling. Something about my heart being inflamed and how my heart was going to guide me. And she was talking about all of these like very beautiful things. But I just couldn't believe it because she had her eyes closed. So she wasn't seeing the emotional response that I was having to this information. But clearly she was tapping into something that I wasn't previously talking to her about. She didn't know me. We were just students that happened to connect over a course online. So those were the first few experiences that didn't just prove to me that this is an experience that can change so much for someone else, but also that the openness that we show up to it is the level of growth that we also receive from it. Another of the things that I started to play around with was how I received information. So at the beginning it was very visual, and then it started to be more about physical things. I could feel someone's like side on fire, almost like hot, and I started to get like pains. I wasn't too particularly into that. And then I started to get mental downloads where I would feel like there was words, and the more I would keep playing with the words, the more words would come. So I would just kind of start talking, and all of a sudden it would be full speech and full sentences, and before I knew it, I was asking questions and they were saying something back in the same question, but my energy would change. And through a lot of time practicing, I've seen how my voice can change so much that it can almost not sound like me, or the cadence will drop. All of a sudden it will be very slow or very fast and very vivid and sparky, and I started to see these changes in the frequency of the information that I would get, depending on who. So I started to understand that there were energies that I could talk to. And very early on, this didn't always lead me to good things. So I gotta make a disclaimer here that when you are going into this world and you are an antenna, you are fully open to broadcasting whatever signal is out there. That doesn't necessarily mean that every signal out there is worthy of being given energy and attention. So I did have some displeasing encounters where I was one time in the middle of the night without protection, without intention. I just opened my Akashic records. I was asking questions, and all of a sudden I feel this face come at me, and then I feel like this pain in my chest, and I physically felt like an energy go through me, and with my eyes closed, almost like a flash of a face inside of my eyes. Like I couldn't even describe how it was. Not, my eyes weren't open. So this was one of the first few experiences that I had where I was like, what was that? It literally felt like it came at me. And I started to understand that your antenna has to be protected. You can't just be broadcasting your signal out there and then kind of like asking anyone to come and talk to you. You have to set a boundary. First of all, it's only with beings that have my higher self and of all involved in their own interests. So you have to specify. And then I started to understand that it was about having an intention. So what do I want to get out of this conversation, channeling or download? What am I seeking? And after having a very clear intention, the right energies would present themselves and say, I have something to offer you based on what you're looking for. And you always align with the fact that this energy has to be from source, has to be of good intentions, of Christ consciousness. And there are many other things that I align with now in my prayers that help me have an intention with who I am speaking and the quality of the frequency that I want to speak with. But at the beginning, I didn't really know this. So I had some very displeasing experiences where I would almost like be talking to really ancient and old energies, and I would just be confused. Because a lot of the things that can happen in your Akashic records also is that they can be very abstract. So I can be talking to energies that have been alive since the dawn of time and don't really have a lot of language. And that was confusing. That was weird. And so I started to understand, like, I can't just be talking to whatever. I need to have an intention. So that led me to eventually not be giving away my energy to channeling anything that wasn't aligned with God, aligned with source, aligned with frequency of love and just of good intentions. So another thing that surprised me throughout this journey was that I had the task at the beginning given by my teacher to read the Akashic records of any form that I wanted to. So if I wanted to read the Akashic field of my house, I could, or if I wanted to go to a river and read its records, I could. And I was curious just to ask a very dumb question. But in my garden, we had 2 types of grass. And I was so curious. I was like, what is this? Like, is this like 2 species of grass coexisting with each other? Why are they here? So I wanted to ask questions to the grass specifically and be like, so why are you different? And as I channeled and I started to get into its Akashic records, lo and behold, was I surprised. I ended up talking to Mother Earth. And what I mean with surprise is that I thought I was talking to something really small, but it turns out that it's all connected. And I think that was one of my biggest lessons. If you're going to ask about something very little that you think has nothing to do with the whole, you're talking to the energy of the whole, even if you think it's not. So my first surprise was thinking that the grass was separate from the entirety of the everything that is the earth. So I ended up asking questions that I thought were going to be very simple to Mother Earth, and eventually she identified herself and she was like, I'm not separate from these things that you are talking to. I am part of their consciousness. So if you want, you can talk to me. And I was taken aback because I was like, I was not prepared for this one. And it started to talk to me and tell me how it could recognize our footprints when it would see us walk on earth. So it was almost like each of us has a specific footprint, and she could tell us all apart. So she also said that when we would be barefoot in the ground, touching the earth, we would work as an energy filter for the information that is out in space or the information that is in our field. So she said, whenever you are barefoot, your crown chakra almost works like a toroidal field. So it basically would receive information and then through our body would transmit it down to earth. So every time that we would be barefoot, we would actually be working as antennas for the earth and transmitting and channeling and translating that information that we're constantly perceiving without really realizing it. So she almost said, like, you are doing a very important work when you are barefoot. And I was so taken aback because I was getting more than I bargained for. I had no idea that was going to be the message. So my first experiences were a lot like that. I would go in and open the Akashic records of this little amethyst stone that I have, which is actually right there. And I was just curious to see what it had to say. And it turns out that that particular amethyst is from Egypt. And it has met me in a previous lifetime. So it told me that its name is Is-Isa. And then she told me that this isn't our first time meeting, that we've actually been acquainted before. And she showed me these images. And again, you have to be very flexible to what you're receiving, because otherwise you block the transmission, you block the channel. So what I was being shown is I was like this little weird blob. I had no body. And I was just moving around. The earth almost looks like barren, like there's nothing in the ground, like a desert. And then I can see that I'm going into the earth, almost like I can go through the layers, like I don't need to like dig. And I go through the layers and I start talking to the consciousnesses of the crystals. So in my job, in that particular instance, for what I understood and for what I was receiving, was to speak to the consciousness of each crystal and directly address them like I was addressing people. And I was some type of customer service for that. But my job was to talk to these consciousnesses. And I would go to planets that were in their very raw forms and speak to these collective consciousnesses connected and living inside of crystals. And when she explained this all to me and she showed me the image, I was like, this looks like I made it up. Like, this is so crazy. This is not true. So at the beginning, I had a lot of these moments where I would just fight everything that I was receiving. I'd be like, I'm making this up. This is not real. But it would tell me so many things that I had no way of proving, that later I found out were real, or later I understood why it connected. Because when I was talking to the earth, one of the things that became clear as I was talking to it was that it was saying that wherever I was, so my house, the garden that I was in, that I was channeling in, had an energy vortex underneath. And I was like, that's so interesting. And it kept talking about this energy vortex. And all of a sudden I asked, is this energy vortex connected to water? And it said, that is what an energy vortex is. It conducts water, therefore electricity. So yeah, it is connected. They're not separate. And I was like, oh, so there's water underneath. And they were telling me all of these things about the water and the energy vortexes. And it's so interesting because in my home, we've talked about this. We have a 3-story tall lemon tree that we don't water that much, and we have no idea where it gets its water from. So when I was telling me about water, I wasn't connecting it. But later on, I understood, and I was thinking to myself, this is exactly what we've said, that there's water underneath this house because the trees that are here seem to be bigger than the supply of water that we give them, because that home is in a very dry place of Mexico. So you would not normally get very tropical trees out there. And this was almost like that confirmation. And this started to happen a lot along the story, the practices, the channeling that I started to have. It was almost like things that I would have an inkling about would become true or would be confirmed somehow by other things. And I think that's today's takeaway, that I'm very proud of the curiosity that it takes to explore other worlds, but the imagination that takes me to them as well, because I wouldn't have thought that that was real if I hadn't allowed myself to believe it in the first place. So today's takeaway is use your imagination more as a tool and less as this burden or obstacle, and to think of it as children do. Imagination is like a key to unlocking the door that we often close as adults, that we think life should be a set of rules and schedules and boundaries and expectations. And we forget about that playfulness that we used to visualize the world when we were kids, where everything was possible and you couldn't tell me any different. And that imagination, not letting it die, keeping it alive, and continuing with that curiosity that we would often see in ourselves as kids. I think going out of our way to see everything with wonder and curiosity and imagination and this spirit of potentiality, like I visualized in that Akashic Garden, is such a win for the adult mind nowadays. If you can just go out of your way to make something creative or just playful and filled with imagination. And I think those are the things that life should be made more of. The creativity and the playfulness and understanding that our minds really do hold the key. I heard a description of the Akashic records that I really liked that went something like this. You can't say that the universe has a universe when it is a universe. The same way you can't say that the universe has an Akashic field. It is an Akashic field. It isn't separated. It's included in it because it's constantly picking up information that you can read back. It's receiving. It's alive. So whatever we put out really is being picked up by this encompassing memory field that we can get information out of, but we're also constantly feeding. So it's very important to understand that our thoughts, our feelings, and how we hold ourselves every day is creating this potentiality that we have in front of us. But we really have to believe that anything is possible in front of us for it to be possible, and not limiting ourselves and not thinking that that isn't real. Because at the beginning, my very construct limited human brain tried to tell me that what I was seeing in the Akashic records was wrong. It wasn't there. I was making it up. What was I doing? I was crazy. At the same time that everything that I was picking up, I was trying to control instead of just letting it land and feeling it, whatever it was that was coming in, and sitting with it. But the important thing is to allow for that flexibility, for that space to exist first. And that really does make a difference. It really does make a difference how we enter the world to create anything that's basically at our fingertips, with that awareness that we can create anything that we wish. So I think imagination really is the key to open more doors than we're aware of. It is more important than they tell us. And that keeping it alive is a way to be more magnetic and attract more of these crazy opportunities that we think are very far away from us, and in truth are closer than we think. So this is it for this episode, guys. Thank you for listening, and I hope you keep your imagination alive. I'll see you in the next one.